Yeah. All right, we're rolling.
Okay. My name is London Longwheeler. I am a second year master's student at CIM. I'm a mezzo-soprano, and I was the witch in this production of Hansel and Gretel.
Doesn't look like it.
No.
Transformative project, yeah.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Mergav Eldan, and I'm a second year artist diploma at CIM, and I've been Hansel, so that's also been a big challenge to go through a pants role, we call it.
Yeah. My name is Matt Brennan. I'm also a second year master's student at CIM, baritone, and I was the father in Hansel and Gretel. Cool.
How old are all of you guys?
I'm 24.
Yeah, I'm not a scholar. I came from Israel. Everything is starting late there. We have obligatory army stuff. And so
One thing that happens in opera is that I'm 26.
Okay.
People's voices mature at different rates.
Yes.
People start with voices that are smaller or larger, and your instrument as an opera singer grows as you age through your middle age. And so people are at different stages of development and capability in opera at a lot of different ages. So you'll find, you might find people singing this opera in school that are, maybe around your age even, depending on where it is. And but in the professional world, you're probably looking at people who are, in their 40s probably singing this kind of thing.
I mean, the witch could be sung by a 70-year-old woman. Like,
Yeah.
I would sing this role for the rest of my life if I wanted to.
And something to keep in mind about where Hansel and Gretel exists in the operatic canon is that the composer, Engelbert Humperdinck, which is a great name, Engelbert Humperdinck, he studied closely the music of Wagner and worked at Bayreuth, which was the opera festival institution in Germany that Wagner established. And so there's a lot of influence from Wagner's music on this opera. And part of that, I think, means that ideally this opera is sung with like very heavy, large voices that you hear singing Wagner's music.
Yeah, because also usually the orchestra is extremely big, even bigger than what we had in CIM. So the voices has to be able to cross it over. So.
And part of that is technical proficiency, and part of that is the size of one's voice.
Yeah, what you were born with.
Yeah.
And you guys don't use microphones, right?
No.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, in general, that is the convention in opera. Now there are some exceptions. I think sometimes in like some of the biggest houses that just like maybe kind of are acoustically problematic.
Right.
Yeah.
No one's ever mic'd kind of like with like a lapel mic or something. It's like maybe there'd be like some general amplification for like the area of the stage.
Yeah, it's not like music theater where there's like a mic here or like up here.
Sometimes like I've seen like mics hanging from the ceiling.
And sometimes, so that there are actually microphones on the stage at CIM, but what those are for is to give the orchestra and the conductor a monitor. Something so that, because they're...
And also for recordings.
Yeah, for recording. So, the ones you see above the stage, that's
always recording.
To record so that we have a resource, so that the school has a resource of the production. But then the orchestra also gets a monitor so that they can most accurately hear what is happening musically on the stage, because they're below the floor, it can be hard to...
Yeah, and the singers can hear it backstage when we
so
need to know what's going on.
It goes both ways.
Yeah, also specifically in Kulas, so every hall has its own acoustic plus and minuses. So in Kulas, if you stand in specific places on the stage, it might be very hard to hear the orchestra while you're singing also. So that is...
But with amplification, opera grew up as an art form from the beginning of the 17th century through... 1600, end of the 16th century through, today. And for most of that time, there was no electricity, there was no amplification of any kind. And so the technique of singing, that is opera singing, was developed primarily, I think we could say, so that singers could be heard above an orchestra and in a hall. The reason the style of opera singing is the way it is so that you can hear someone without amplification. And we still do that today, even though there is amplification. Yeah.
So what inspired all of you in the opera?
Well, for me personally, my grandmother was a voice and piano teacher. I took lessons from her when I was younger, but I hated them. There's some weird dynamic with taking lessons from a family member that's kind of weird, but I didn't like it, and then I went and I was in 8th grade, and the choir director heard me sing and wanted me to be in choir, and then from there it kind of snowballed into high school, and then I got really involved in that, and my teacher that I took in high school was impressed with my voice and gave me a lot of opportunities there. And then I decided at the end of my senior year that I wanted to sing, and that was like the only thing that I could see myself doing. So yeah, and music theater was sort of my gateway into opera. Like I never went into it thinking I'm going to do opera one day. It was sort of a gradual transition from that, which I think is pretty common with a lot of people, especially like high school, middle school age, is you do a lot of music theater, and then you kind of, it's like the gateway into the opera world. So
yeah.
So I'm from Israel. I came to CIM especially to study here. So in Israel we know all the musicals, of course, but it's not as strong in the culture as here. So my story is more. I was playing the piano since I was like 3 or something, and I always sang and wanted to study voice, like how to sing better. And finally, so we have, in Israel we have lots of people in the music that come from Russia. So all my teachers were Russian, and they always told me, you cannot study voice singing till you excuse me, have your first period, because this is a physical thing. So only after you grow up a little bit, you can, according to their also beliefs also, like this is not a, it's not a belief, like belief in the physicality of the voice, the human voice. So finally, when I got to start studying how to sing, my teacher came to me and gave me after I was already playing the piano for a while, playing classical music, my teacher came to me and gave me piece of music for voice that is completely classical, and I didn't know that time anything about opera. Never heard it, seriously didn't know what it is.
Not even in school or anything?
Nothing, nothing at all. And I was, no, I just was playing, just playing Chopin and stuff like that, and I was the biggest nerd in the world, so I was like, oh my god, classical music that you can sing. And I just went for it. I loved it a lot, and actually I loved the most the music that was without words, because it was the most closer to the instrumental music. So that's how, and then I just followed this, I was just kind of fighting my way through getting my my studies and like getting everything in order to be a singer and still keep on doing that.
Yeah, I think my story is pretty similar to London's, and I think that as I started thinking about what I wanted to study when I went to college and do as a career, it seems to me that studying voice would be just the best way to develop my skill set as a singer and as a musician. But when I went to college, I definitely wasn't sure that I wanted to be an opera singer or even a singer, really. And then that kind of, I found some clarity about that over time. But yeah, everyone has a really unique story. And everyone also just has really unique timing, right? Like, as Mergav said, someone studying violin at CIM, for instance, like in order to win an audition at CIM, which is like one of the best schools to be an orchestral musician in the country and probably the world, you've probably been playing since you were like 3 years old. you know, give or take. Singers can't really work on their instrument until they go through puberty because it's a different instrument after you go through puberty. All of our voices change, men and women, especially men. But
Yeah, men is even worse.
it's just a different thing. It continues to mature, but there's like a big change that happens when you're at that adolescent age.
And for women, whenever they get pregnant and stuff like that, also.
Yeah.
So it's like every day, whatever you eat, whatever, like any hormonal change in our body for female and male, it's always it's always, affecting your voice.
Yeah.
So where are you guys like from? Like you're from Israel, like where? And like are you guys from out of the state?
Yeah, I'm originally from Oklahoma.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and
I just imagine everyone that goes to CIM is from Cleveland. I don't know like, I'm from
Yeah,
Cleveland.
I think most people at CIM, I'm sure a large majority are not from Ohio.
That's
And
crazy.
There's a large
always
international
thought
student
Cleveland.
population too.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
like
Mergav is not
hugely
unique.
international.
Yeah.
I'm from
But it's
Chicago.
like 30%.
That's cool too. Yeah, that's cool. I was just wondering. But yeah.
You better
Yeah.
get your questions in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a real question.
We'll try to be brief.
I have a real question. So, you guys, you spoke in German, you sung in German. Did you study German before that? How did you adapt to that? What steps did you have to
Yeah.
take? How far ahead did you have to start preparing?
Well, I guess I'll start. So as far as being familiar with German, I studied German while I was studying abroad in Salzburg, Austria. So I feel like German is probably the language I'm most comfortable with. Like, we also, in undergrad, I'm sure most of us have taken a class called German Diction, where you study how the language sounds, and you learn something called the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is sort of a collection of symbols that all universally mean the same sound. And particularly when I'm starting the process of learning an opera in a different language, there's these books that are out there that have this phonetic alphabet for each and every single word, and then it has the translation of the text. And so one of the things that I do in the beginning of this process is I write it all out, even though I'm pretty comfortable with German by itself, so I know that I'm getting the sounds correctly. As far as how long and how far ahead I have to study a score kind of depends on the size of the role. For me, the witch is all at the end. And so I think I almost started immediately just because I was so excited and I love this role. But I started sort of speaking the language almost as soon as I was cast, like at the middle of December or something like that.
Yeah, first or second week of December.
Yeah, so I was looking at the language, and then learning the music came after that, just kind of plunking it out, looking at it, listening to recordings, like hearing what it sounds like with an orchestra as well, putting it in context. It's like a huge process of that, but it's several weeks of that, and then having to get it in your body, the muscle memory, and then memorizing it is like a whole animal.
Ideally, it would be ideal if we were fluent in every
Yes.
language that we needed to sing in.
Yes.
And so, by the time you're studying at the graduate level, studying opera, you have some experience studying French, German, and Italian, which are the three languages that the large bulk of the operatic repertoire is in. But it's also, I don't know anyone that's really fluent in all three of those languages and English. So the challenge is, how do you perform and understand exactly what you're saying, and how are you able to act as a character and speak in that language if you're not fluent? And the answer is just you need to know the diction really well, and then you need to memorize exactly what you're saying and practice it a lot. So it just takes time.
Yeah, to have a real word-to-word translation memorized, and then having a good idea of how generally the language is sounded like when people speak it. And I think we all, as performers, we have to do what you're gonna do now, the history research. We all do it. I go back, as far as recordings existed, to listen to the oldest recordings we have right now of people performing this opera, to see the how you call it, the transition, the fashions. Also, we have like different categories of voices, obviously, and there is different fashions all through history. You have conductors putting sopranos doing the witch, or Hansel also. Like you have, well, Hansel less, but a little bit sometimes. People, like all kinds of different stuff that changing through time, and it's very interesting to follow. And then you can like pick and choose what do you want to try to take from every recording you're listening to. Well, also this something I don't know that to do is to go through the story that came, like the opera came from Hansel and Gretel, another like a story, a legend. So look through that thing and see what the composer chose to bring into the composition and what he decided to leave, and what does that mean.